why don't we get started? And Paul, why don't you give us a quick 30-second intro on yourself and how you got into the nonprofit space?
So I'm Paul D'Alessandro, Paulie D, as they call me outside of New Jersey, but I've been, I know, right? So I'm in the nonprofit. I've been doing nonprofit consulting and fundraising for 30 years. Started in law, and like most people, kind of found my way into working for a nonprofit called the University of Notre Dame, running the Southeast U.S. for a $350 million campaign on the major gift side, which I didn't know what a major gift was. So, but I was a young man, not knowing a lot about this. That's how I got started.
Yeah. And you've been doing this now in nonprofit space for 30 years?
Since 87.
87.
Market crash was when my first day on the job.
Okay. That is a great way to start. Let's go to the next slide, Anna, and I'll introduce myself and our company. I started a company called Engage by Cell about 15 years or so ago. And one of our first services was a text messaging solution so that people could send text messages instead of just email to their donors. That has picked up steam in a very big way. And we are actively involved with all kinds of mobile giving and thermometers. We've got about 4,000 clients around the United States. So if this presentation today is not about our company, it's really about Paul's views on some of the craziness happening in the nonprofit space. But at the end of the session, if any of you have some interest in learning about some mobile tools, I'd love to have a chat with you. All right, Anna. And this is just a rundown of what we're doing. You've all probably seen where you could text in and make a donation on your phone. That's one of the services we offer. The next service we call Mobile Donate. That's on the next slide. Many of you probably have a mobile giving solution where people can use PayPal or a credit card or Apple or whatever. That's another one of our big services. And then we've got another service that's a thermometer. You can post this on your website or at a big event, just using easy to use technology to really let people hopefully get more engaged and donate more to your campaign. All right, so that's a little bit about us. And Paul, tell us a little bit more about what you're doing and maybe how your work relates to the folks on the call today.
Thank you, Dave. My work relates to everybody on the call. I've done campaigns and major gift work in 100 cities around the country. We've done work with startups, one-man shops, to a multi-billion-dollar capital campaign with Habitat for Humanity International. I've been on a lot of solicitation calls. I say over 4,000, and
wow,
it's always been hands-on. I came from the school of fundraising from Notre Dame, which was, board members didn't really raise money; the development people did, and so I never knew really that board members would go ask. What's never been part of my philosophy.
Yeah,
but, really got a hands-on approach, and everybody. There's common problems, but everybody's unique.
And you work with about how many clients in the course of a year?
We're still boutique, small, probably about 20 clients in the course of a year, from, like I said, coaching development folks, prepping for campaigns, doing campaigns, but not traditional ways where some firms charging $20,000 and $30,000 a month. I've always been about, it's a nonprofit's money, so let's be the best steward and let's find a solution that fits within their parameters, not within our, the traditional parameters.
So people that are struggling with end of year giving or dealing with a board member or some coaching or any of these issues, they should call you just to see if you've got some help for them. Paul, you've also written some books. Maybe hold up what you've got.
Yeah.
Let's do a plug for Paul's book, which you can get on Amazon. I've read it; it's fantastic.
Thank you.
And maybe we'll put in maybe Anna, you can put on the chat window a link to the Amazon page for that, so that if people are interested, they could just download it to their Kindle. All right. Well, when we first met, Paul, we were kind of brainstorming about what are all the things going through a nonprofit's mind, and it's got to be crazier today, Paul, than maybe ever. I don't know, but why don't you tell us and walk us through your presentation?
Sure. And, it's going to be like sipping water through a fire hose, because it's, I started this book right before COVID and finished it during COVID. I still traveled during COVID, 20 states, and had clients in Colorado and Montana. So that didn't keep me down. But really what I've seen in this space, is so much change and flux. When I started the business, there were 400,000 nonprofits. Now there's 1.6 million. But it's not the amount of nonprofits that have been added, but it's what's going on that we have to pay attention to. So I didn't want to look up past like what has happened in the past to predict the future. I just want to say this is what's going on that you got to be paying attention to. My good friend from the University of Notre Dame started the Giving USA report, and I know how all the information that went into that. It's kind of old data. But so let me just talk. I want to go through some of these things. There's a lot of information I downloaded for the book. And by the way, there's one for $75. That's not my book. This one's like $9.99. So, that there are things right now that are beyond our control. And I think they make everybody anxious. And, we've seen this through time now. And one of them obviously is inflation. But as long as the market is kind of holding its ground right now, I want to say we're okay. Unfortunately, people who have money still have a lot of money, and people who unfortunately are poor are actually more poor. It's the middle and the bottom that are really hurt. And to me, those aren't the big donors, but they give something. So we're losing some of that. Now, when we did the slides, we talked about the Ukrainian war was kind of big and coming up, and it still has a major impact on us because of energy cost. A lot of people have tech companies, in particular, have people in the UK who are working. In Ukraine who are working for them, and it also creates an urgency in giving, which kind of diverts from perhaps people giving to your nonprofit. When Roe v. Wade passed, for example, there was something that I read that was called rage giving. And there's a left and right now in every sort of giving. So people who are really upset about the decision either gave to the Planned Parenthood side, and people who were happy about it kind of gave it to the other side. And these urgent things kind of just take away from the needs that you have that you're doing locally. And also there's a lot of political ramifications that are going on right now. There's things and I could go in a lot of detail about it. There's, for instance, social credit scoring, which is a vogue in China, which has to do with, what the things that you're doing and getting a social credit score based on, what you could buy and where you can live. But also there's a lot of problems. We have a client right now that's in Lebanon. There's just absolutely misery right now in Lebanon. The people have no electric, and they're just struggling. People are coming across the border from Syria. The same thing in Sri Lanka. You've seen all the migration across the borders. So, we have a lot more needs, and, so things are happening right now, but those people are all going to need help. And I always say there's enough money in the world to solve all the problems in the world, but sometimes it goes through a funnel. There's a lot of takers along the way. And of course, supply chain issues, you might not think that it's a big deal, but there are still people waiting for durable goods like washing machines and cars that don't have chips and things that are constantly going up. So some people can't make a decision. If you're seeing a donor that's building a house, like I'm moving into a condo, I was supposed to move in November. It's now May because they were waiting for all the AC stuff to come in. So that slows people's decisions. So let's go on to the next one, Anna. So, but these are the things that are in our control. And these are the things that you kind of need to be paying attention to. The rise in tech. I'll just by way of example, tech sort of is kind of taking dominance as far as the nonprofit space. And what I mean by that, and if I was at the recent AFP conference, you saw a lot of consultants years ago selling their services. Now you see a lot of tech companies there. Mm-hmm. Companies like iWave and Guy by Cell and Boodle AI and Arjuna, and some of these you haven't heard from. And there's a lot of people moving around from job disruptions, especially since COVID. There were a lot of people who were out of work in nonprofits. Of course, donor advised funds, we're going to talk about that and its impact on how you get money, and also cyber threats to your nonprofit and the changes that are coming place. Fundraising compensation, I'm going to talk a little bit about that because it's kind of a bugaboo with me, and kind of that challenge that you all have. I mean, I've only seen a few nonprofits that kind of go above and beyond in adequately rewarding those who are working in the nonprofit space. I mean, a lot of us have come from a different place, and we didn't start out saying, "Oh, I want to be a fundraiser or a nonprofit," but when you got there, you thought you could do it, make an impact in the world, and perhaps you thought maybe a little bit easier, but you were actually probably working harder than some of the for-profit side. And then, of course, a big thing for me is, what is the donor mindset now? It's different than it was 20 years ago and 30 years ago. So, Anna, we can go to the next one. Okay, so here's some things that I wanted you to look at in terms of opportunities right now with for you. And one of them is when I started in this space, people wrote a check and they gave money, and there was a nonprofit. And then along came things called L3Cs, which were like limited liability corps, not the way you know them, but for profit, and B corps and all that. But now there's a bunch of different ways that nonprofits can raise money. My feeling is this, is that if you only are going to survive, if you think you can only survive on charitable dollars, then you're going to have to work harder than ever. Take a look at Habitat for Humanity, for instance. A couple of years ago, they raised their restores, which, if you're familiar with Habitat, which sell used goods, raised $400 million globally out of the restores to support their missions. There's a lot of different nonprofits that are doing things to raise money, and you don't necessarily need to have a 501c3 model to get to where you're going. One of the things that I've been talking to a number of companies about is impact investing, because donors sometimes get frustrated that nonprofits move at a very slow pace. So you'll see these social impact funds. So there's an organization that I'm working with, and they came to me and they said, "Paul, we have 12 clients doing different things, and the amount of money we need to raise is about 110 million. And they're around diversity and inclusion, healthy food and sustainability, video gaming, science for public good, criminal justice reform, environmental health, $20 million, empowering donors, good nation." So I'm just reading off a lot of these different things. But so this is, again, you can't see it, but this is something that you're competing against. You're not just going out and talking to donors about, could you support my nonprofit? Because now you have the Impact Investment Fund saying, not give to this, it's for a social good cause, and then you're going to get a return on investment. So donors have this, there's a saying that I have, which is donors underwrite what they help write. And so they have a mindset of doing good and making an impact in the world. And sometimes the charity tax deductibility isn't so much an issue for them. It was with a donor a few months, well, it was we were skiing in Park City, and he said, I don't like being considered a giving unit. And I just wanted to have direct support to the people that I'm serving to. So again, you've got to talk to your donors, because what you want isn't necessarily what they want. And it's about what they need, not you need. Next slide. And if I'm going too fast, someone just slow me down. It's New Jersey in me and 3 cups of coffee.
So Paul, before this slide, are you also suggesting that some of the folks on the call think about the impact investing and maybe changing their message so that it's got that impact investment kind of cliche associated with it?
Well, yeah, I think that there's an opportunity to get, you have to look at what the end goal is in all this. And the end goal is to make a difference for a certain group of people. But, let me give you an example. I have a client that's going to do, they're going to serve underprivileged people near where I live, but they want to build 3 stories up on that. That will generate revenue. So perhaps the model is, a revenue generating model for the donors that will give back. And that money then could get reinvested into the next project that creates a revenue generator for the thing. So you can have a 501c3. There's an impact investment fund manager that I'm speaking to. They have an impact investment fund, and they have a side share 501c3 that they build alongside it. So it's just, I share this just for a way for people to be open-minded, that there isn't just one solution to the problem that you're trying to solve.
Got it.
So, with respect to tech innovations, and, this is the first 2 chapters of my book was all about artificial intelligence. And a few years back, when the Bucket Challenge happened, Tina Zeff, who was the COO of ALS, said, she was giving a talk and said, we have so many names from the Bucket Challenge, and we didn't know what to do with them. So we talked to MasterCard, and we partnered with them. And within a day, they identified who our best donor prospects were. And then fast forward a couple of years later, I met some folks at a company called Boodle AI, which I really like. And they create a persona of the type of person that's most likely to give. But a lot of these companies right now are buying zettabytes of data because they're watching what everybody's doing on Facebook, on Instagram, and that allows predictability of who's likely to support what you're doing. And it's also important to know that more donors, again, that's the donor mindset, they're looking at the return on investment. How are you measuring your impact? Habitat, I think about Habitat because it's on my mind lately. The model changed from building houses to families served. And that simple change in how they measured impact created an incremental, a force multiplier, if you will, of revenue in. And so also I see, we talked about fundraisers soliciting to having the artificial intelligence doing it. Artificial intelligence is so precise that it could identify not only who your best donors are, but at some point, this is what I envision happening, is based on, where you go to church, if you go to church, if you have a pet, and where you shop, and where you live, and kind of the things that you look at, artificial intelligence might say to you, put $5,000 in this account. And artificial intelligence will say, based on the lifestyle that you live, there are these charities, and we think that based on that $5,000, this is how it could be allocated. Now, that's how machine learning works. It's not happening now, but I see it happening in some fashion at some point. Now, you have a lot of artificial intelligence writing thank you letters and donor messaging. They're even writing political speeches. Hillary Clinton gave a speech recently, and it was all written by artificial intelligence. So let's go to the next slide. Because I don't have the clock up. Oh, there it is. Okay. So, again, artificial intelligence, when I asked somebody for a gift years ago, probably before a lot of you were even in this space, they would sit back and they say, oh my gosh, where did you get that number from? And I would say, well, I really don't have a crystal ball. I mean, we would have pulled books down and spend a week to research a name. But the data right now is pretty precise. I tell people don't rely on the data solely, but it's really a good indicator of what the future is. Now, a problem with a lot of nonprofits is they buy the data, but they don't know what to do with the data. We have great names, but then they don't know what the strategy is. And we can help with that. I mean, it's kind of, I always think about the Seinfeld episode where he says, you can hold you could take the reservation, but you can't hold the reservation. So it's the same thing with this. You can get the data, but you got to do something with it. And so you got to have the right mix of people on board. That person who is like gets along well with everybody, is not the best fit always. It's not the football coach or the priest or whatever to put in the nonprofit or the salesperson, but you have somebody who's kind of an adaptive learner. They're entrepreneurial, and they embrace the culture of a learning and adaptation. And they got to have some emotional intelligence with donors as well. Let's go to the next one. I'm going to speed it up a little bit. Donor advised funds. This is a question I get a lot about, and it's I want to say the 800-pound gorilla in the room. At the end, it used to be donors would be looking for money to give at the end of the year so they can get tax deductibility. So I've been in nonprofits where they call on December 30th or December 31st, say, can I make a gift so I get the year-end gift? Well, donor advised funds have been around a long time. It's just that they've lowered the bar for people to get in there. and they've made it so much easier for people to give out. And so now, actually, what we're telling some of our nonprofit clients is you can ask a donor advised fund, not the fund itself, but the member, to loan out you, like, let's say you need $25,000. You could have them give you that $25,000 and pay it back. But more and more money is being raised for donor advised fund. And it's a very competitive environment. So you as a nonprofit organization not only want to get money from the individuals who have money in the donor advised funds, but you also are competing against the people who are out in the donor advised funds around the country, and their measure of performance is assets under management. So they've got to take in more than they give out every year. So let me go to the next one. So digital cyber threats regulation. This is something else that I think it's really critical for everybody to pay attention to and for the boards to pay attention to. And you could see in 2015, the National Center for Charitable Statistics was hacked. And then Blackbaud had a big data breach, and they wound up in a class action suit that's actually still going on right now, where all the information was out there that they held. So could I go to the next slide, Anna? One of the things that I saw recently with the cyber threat and security, and it's not just big entities, it's small. A school district in Texas had 21,000, I think, members, and they got a hold of all the data of the hackers, and they held it up for ransom, and the school district didn't want to do anything. So what happened was they wound up calling the people whose credit card information they had, and they said, if you guys, we're going to release your data unless the school district pays our ransom. Because basically when they hacked, they shut the system down. We had a client, a homeless shelter in New York. They got hacked. They had all their data frozen. There was a ransom. They weren't going to pay it, but because they didn't back it up, they were backing it up every 2 weeks. They lost 2 weeks worth of data. And so, it's a horrible thing. So, your board needs to be aware of the things that are going on in cybersecurity. There's cybersecurity insurance, and I think it's going to get to a point where it's going to become uninsurable because there's so much going on right now. But there's more public awareness and fear about it. In Europe, they had some of you might know the GDPR, which means you can't disclose private data. If you are fundraising, if you have donors in Europe that you're raising funds from, you can't share their data. And then, you have to have a kind of, we're going to see a place where you're going to own your private data and have data boxes. So let's see if we could go to the next slide. And so before I go into that, I just want to say that I would have a conversation with your board about investments in the future. And investments in the future include investing in tech, artificial intelligence, and data while you can, getting as much as you can, and also the securing the data information. The lawyer in me says that you're become vulnerable for suits for releasing personal data. I see more suits coming down the road at some point, because if there's in law school you learn the deep pocket doctrine, and so if you have great resource, then they might go after you. I was doing some work with some Catholic organizations when the pre-scandal came out, and at that time everybody was trying to have no debt. But then that created a liability, because when they got sued, then some of them had to sell assets and go bankrupt. So now there's kind of a thinking that maybe we should be debt encumbered so we're not vulnerable to lawsuits. So on fundraising compensation, this is something that is problematic in our space. And basically, some of my clients have said to me, Paul, you're not allowed to do percentage fundraising. It's not a law. It's something from the code of conduct. I've spoken to the AFP. They might say that at least on the fundraising side, you could have a success fee. But organizations like Charity Water, if you take a look at their model, they now have some private sector businesses putting money into, I think it's called the pond. We talk about it in my book, and that money can be used as bonuses. for staff, because, you know, I realize that most of you folks and even, you know, for us are underpaid, but also it's not wrong to have incentive comp, and it's not wrong to have a bonus comp. We had a client, another client in Colorado. They had a bunch of young fundraisers. When I say young in age, and they were new in the space, but they based their comp on a base salary plus 3 factors. How did the overall organization do in its fundraising? How did the development team do in an organization? How did they do regionally? And there was one young man who had a $50,000 salary and did so well that he got a $50,000 bonus. And I think that helps us keep folks in place. So Anna, let's see. And part of the problem that it's not the fundraising comp is not competitive is there's some IRS rules, and boards are sometimes concerned about the reasonable comp standard. I have not, in my 30 years of fundraising, nor in my law side, because we do some nonprofit law, I do personally, have I ever seen an issue with this. What I do see issues with is donors who make big gifts to academic institutions, and the academic institutions not following through, and then the donor family winning that money back. And then, of course, the AFP Code of Conduct. You know, I really don't know how that started, but my feeling is, and this is my personal feeling, is back when all this started, there was a model, and that was you go to a board, a bunch of people in the community go out and they ask for the money, and that was the standard of success. So how would you compensate somebody if you're just leading people to raise money? But now we have hundreds of thousands of fundraisers out there on the street raising money, and there's got to be incentive comp. And I think we'd have more people in the space, and I think we'd retain more people. So I think there's a lack of understanding on the business model of this. So next slide. So again, it limits innovation, like I said, and it keeps people from entering in this space. And I think there's some amazing people who could have tremendous impact. I'm working with somebody right now. He left the private sector, came into work for a nonprofit near me, and he's frustrated beyond tears. And he says, you know, Paul, I'm killing myself. I'm just going to go back to the private sector because they can't increase his comp. I had another gentleman. He worked for a nonprofit. He was making $70,000 a year as a development director. He had great relationships with everybody. He asked for a 10% salary increase. The ED said, no, it's not in line. We've got to stay low. He left, and they lost $400,000 a year in fundraising. So you've got to pay attention. Boards have to pay attention to the collateral damage of not keeping and retaining folks. And then the last slide before we go to Q&A is kind of the changing donor mindset. In my last chapter of my book, I interviewed 10 very wealthy donors, and I said, you know, what do you see is going on in the space? And, you know, there's some of them took shots at fundraisers, you know, the way our approach and all that. And, you know, I used to stand up and say to people, you know, I'm both a fundraiser and an attorney, so I don't know which side of me you don't want to like, but people have problems with lawyers and they have problems with fundraisers. But they are looking at both different ways of giving, like cryptocurrency. Blockchain is going to be big. It is big now, especially on overseas giving. I saw one donor give away. He's cut money because of the fees that are charged in overseas transfers. And then, you know, they want to have good, and they want to see a direct impact. Donors give to story. They don't give to your need. I said this at the outset. They give to what they need, and their need is to go do good. So you've got to appeal to their heart and not to their head. And so, and they want to belong to something bigger than themselves. And so this is just kind of a snapshot of what goes through my mind and what I see. I do want to mention there's one company out there that I talked to recently called every.org, and they've created a model. They've got like 2,900 nonprofits, and because of fast cash and Venmo and in the different ways that people give money, they've set it up so they accept crypto, so people can give through every.org, and that way you don't have to try and figure it out on your own website. Nice. So you know, that's kind of my presentation in 30 some odd minutes, and I want to answer some questions.
Yeah, so this is a great time for everybody to go in the chat window and ask some questions. I'll start it off, Paul. now that we're in October, heading towards Thanksgiving and Giving Tuesday and year end, I'm sure everybody on the call is thinking, how do I capitalize on that? And what's your advice?
Well, I think that model needs to change. And, you know, I believe there's a lot of statistics on year-end giving, and they say it's good. You know, people give, you know, the budgets are up 20% year-end giving. Why is that? Because everyone plans towards year-end giving. But if you do corporate fundraising, for example, most of the corporations have already done their budgets, you know, August, September, October for next year. So, you know, going to corporations is not going to be in the best interest. They're going to say, talk to me next year, because we've already created our budget for 2023. So you need to get ahead of the curve. Now, I just had this conversation because we're putting a major gift program in for a nonprofit in DC with a $50 million budget. You know, major gift donors likewise have made their commitments already. Sometimes they've made, you know, if they're pledged out for 5 years, you know, I'll talk to donors and they'll say, well, you know, we've made our gift and we're finishing our pledge in 2 years. Well, then can you start in year 3? And we'll start talking to them. Mm-hmm. So you've got to get ahead of the curve and get away from this mindset of creating this false sense of urgency. And it's a bad model, in my opinion, because fundraising happens all year round. We used to say, not in the summer. Now it's nonstop with all the technology we have.
Mm-hmm. Giving Tuesday, should organizations try to promote that, or you're not that big on it?
You know, I'm not big on giving. It's just everything that comes of vogue. I mean, I just look at my own email box. Giving Tuesday, I get literally hundreds of things. You know, I can't even flag through the things that I care about, so I just do automatically delete. Right. Now, if you have a targeting marketing program and sophisticated and savvy, and you plan up for it, then that might work. Some, you know, look, I have some clients that do well on Giving Tuesday, and it's just a number on their line, bottom line. But I'd much rather see that time and energy spent talking to donors on a one-on-one and getting major gifts.
We've got an interesting question in the chat window. Maybe you can see it there, Paul, about an organization that might have not been that active in the last couple of years, probably a bit due to COVID. How to get back in the game? Slowly, big announcement, phone calls. What do you think?
You know, I think we have this perception. You know, I've done a lot of feasibility studies, and people have this perception that everybody knows about them. So I think if you were to get back in the game, that I think this, and I say this very respectfully, I don't think it's going to be as big a deal as you not in stepping out of the game. The problem with stepping out of the game is making assumptions during COVID that people aren't going to give. For example, Notre Dame, which is my, you know, I talk about that. They stood their major gift fundraisers down from April, May, and June, and they rolled back fundraising in July. So for me, I would just jump back in there. You don't need an announcement. Just get out there and start doing it again.
Yeah, right. Peer-to-peer, smaller gifts, broaden the base. Important today more than in the past, or focus on the big gifts?
Well, you know, the small gifts lead to big gifts. So you've got but this is a time and energy thing. So if you're one person, you know, how much time and energy can you put in this? So that's why artificial intelligence can help build out some of the bottom side of things and take out that time. It takes as much time to ask somebody for $1,000 as it does $10,000, as it does $50,000. What you need is a strong case. Where are you going to be in the next 5, 10 years? How much money do you need to get there? What's going to be the impact? And what can that person do to help that?
On artificial intelligence, if people are not using that now, obviously you're suggesting that they do, how do they get started? What are the companies? Do they call you? What's the best way to like dive into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think I know, you know, there's some really good companies in this space. Yes, they could call me or email me at Paul at High Impact Nonprofit. But they're, you know, just by way of example, you know, Giving DNA and Donor Search and Boodle AI and Arjuna, they all have different aspects of what they do. But again, it's an investment. But in this space that we live in, you don't know what you don't know. And that's what gets you in trouble. And I always talk about, when I talk about St. Jude's Children's Hospital, because last year they raised $2 billion. They have 400 fundraisers on the ground. They only have 76 hospital beds. in Memphis. I'm the parent of somebody who's lost a kid to cancer. And, they haven't moved the dial, but they're raising a heck of a lot of money, but they are well equipped with all these tools. So you've got to put it in your budget and you got to do some research. I was talking to somebody about a CRM yesterday. They are up to their eyeballs in trying to figure out what's up and what's down on the new CRM. So, change happens incrementally, but you've got to get in the game so you're not left behind.
Well, and you're competing against the St. Jude's folks who are using every tool possible to get right to that mom of that child, and then you're kind of out of luck.
Yeah, that's why I say, donors, people worry about, making the right ask, but I say donors are often, they've been asked for more gifts, major gifts, than you probably have asked for gifts. And that's why you got to step out there and get in front of them. I've been big on always getting face to face. And I know everyone's saying COVID and all that, but even during COVID, I think we captured a $500,000 gift on Zoom.
So face to face, in person, and Zoom, if that's the only way to go. But basically get in their home or get in their office.
Yeah, get in their home, get in their office, get in a coffee shop, meet in the airport. I mean, again, those things are investments, I've got 3 million miles. I mean, and I don't say brag or anything. It's not good or bad because there's a price I paid for that, but I got 3 million miles of flying around the country, seeing donors.
Yeah.
And, it kind of takes its toll, but you got to make something happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe go to the last slide where we've got our contact info, and we're just about out of time. Any more questions from the folks on the call today? If so, put them in the chat window. And Paul, best way to reach you is just send you a little email. And I think I would advise A, go download his book, and B, if you've got any of these issues that you're struggling with, Paul knows a tremendous amount about this and can be kind of your advisor. Any final thoughts, Paul, before we wrap it up?
No, the only thought that I have is I know people are worried about next year, but I think next year is going to be a good year. I think interest rates, I'm not a prognosticator on finance, but I'm talking to people in that space. They think real estate rates are going to drop down. And I think we're going to find some balance after the elections. I'm not predicting, which party wins or not, but I think next year we're going to find a little more settling down, and that's going to give the donor comfort in supporting him.
Right. All right. Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you for all of you for joining us today. We will send you an email tomorrow with these slides and some of the notes, and feel free to call Paul or myself if you want to know about either one of our businesses. So thanks so much, Paul, and have a good day, everybody.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.